Before we dive in, I want to share that this episode is made possible thanks to the support of the Sierra Club Foundation. They've been doing powerful work to advance climate solutions and environmental justice. And I'm so glad we get to feature one of their board members, Steph Speirs. When the idea came up for us to do an episode about wealth, I was conflicted. Talking about money is uncomfortable, and to be honest, I'm just not a finance person. But this week's guest helped to reframe my perspective on capital, illuminating that there's all kinds of wealth, including ecological wealth, community wealth, and the wealth of knowledge. Steph Speirs is an energy entrepreneur and climate solutions teacher. In our conversation, she reminded me that nature itself is a marketplace. Every ecosystem is made up of actors exchanging services, plants offering pollen, bees carrying it to other flowers, and so on. In fact, the root of the word economy is eco, meaning home, our shared planet. My name is Willow, and this is The Nature of. Each week, we'll look to the natural world for insights into how to navigate the experience of being human. This week, we're exploring the nature of wealth. For most people, the economy is a major issue when it comes to not only how they vote, but how they live their daily lives. If we want to make climate progress, we need to get people to understand that a transition to renewable energy will actually be good for the economy. Meanwhile, climate chaos is only going to cost us. Globally, we're expected to spend $38 trillion on climate change per year by 2050. So, if that number scares you too, I'd encourage you to stick around and see if Steph changes how you think about wealth and what we place value on. So, Steph Speirs, I'm so honored to have you on the podcast today. As a starting point for our conversation, I would love for you to share about how you are thinking about the word wealth. It's a word that carries a lot of weight. And I'm curious, if you could redefine wealth or shift how people think about that word, how would you define it?
You're right. I think when people hear wealth or capital, they immediately think about the trappings of the financial system that we're in today. And really, I like to take it back to core values. And wealth should generate this idea of abundance, the same kind of awe-inspiring abundance that nature gives us when we're in the middle of the forest or the middle of the ocean and we see life all around us. And so ultimately, I think wealth means the ability to have time and spaciousness to enjoy abundance. It's clean air, it's clean water, it's well-being, not only defined as self-care, but access to community public goods that should be things like good health, good education, and a community in which you feel belonging and inclusion. When I was working in India at a solar company, I once was camping in a really rural area on the banks of the Ganges River, and I brushed up against this bush, and it immediately gave me this crazy, painful rash. It was some kind of poison ivy-like plant, and we were miles away from any hospital or clinic or help. And the local next to me, he's like, "Oh, don't worry, don't freak out. Here," he plucks a plant that's right next to the ivy, and he rubbed it on the increasing red swollenness on my leg, and then it disappeared. And he said, "You see, the poison and the healing is planted together. They coexist, they live together, and that's how nature gives."
The poison and the healing exist side by side. That is such a beautiful note to start this conversation on.
Yeah.
I really love that you led with the word value also, because I think it has two meanings that are both really apt in this context. And I think that what we place value on, what we spend capital on, it reveals so much about what we value as a culture, especially as it relates to wealth, as we're talking about redefining it. Some of these other essential forms of wealth that you're talking about, clean air, ecological knowledge, community, they're often invisible in financial conversations or models. How do we build or shift our economic systems so that they recognize that wealth beyond just the financial sense?
The financial system we operate in today is really about short-term monetization of natural and human resources. And that's actually come at the expense of grand human and planetary health. Because in the current system, only a few are accumulating more and more wealth, where the vast majority of people are seeing either their lives stagnate or maybe even get worse. And so when we think about reimagining how capital can be deployed, I'm on the board of the Sierra Club Foundation, and we have an initiative called Shifting Trillions. And so we think about shifting trillions as moving trillions of dollars of capital away from extractive economies and towards regenerative ones and restorative ones. And it's basically, how do you move money to create a healthier world for all living beings? And it is possible to do. It takes a few different measures, though. Right now, we measure our financial health in terms of GDP. GDP is a measurement of production of goods and services. It's not a measurement of well-being. It's not a measurement of if people are healthy or if they are feeling like they have their basic needs met of shelter and food and nutrition and education. And so we have to start by measuring those things more. And we also have to start, to your point about values, about living up to our values. So quick data point. In 2017, the chief financial institution in Germany noted that the climate crisis and the pollution crisis is going to cost us $550 trillion to fix, which is more than literally all the money in the world.
Sure.
And right now, just a couple years ago, we spent $1.3 trillion on the climate crisis. Estimates recently showed that we have to be spending $4 to $8 trillion on climate solutions in order to solve this problem. So we're only spending 1.3 trillion. That's 1% of the global GDP. And so it's not reasonable to say that 99% of our financial activity is either not helping our planet and people or harming it. So we just have to shift that ratio to be more in line with what we know we have to do for the future of our planet and kids and grandkids.
Because ultimately, as you point out, it will only be more costly in the long term if we don't.
Exactly. And that number, 550 trillion, was based on 2017 traction, and we've already been slower than what we should have done in the last several years.
So we need to get to work.
We need to get to work. We need to do it urgently.
And again, coming back to what you were just sharing around values, you know, I'm curious how much of this you feel is possible within capitalism, which is a contentious word, I think, particularly sometimes in this movement. And yet, something you and I have spoken about is that if we say capitalism, if we say the system is the problem for everything, we're not actually addressing the values underneath that system that have turned that system harmful. And then it becomes easy to just replicate that harm with other systems. So I'm curious what you think about or how you feel we might be able to shift that conversation so we can move from the place of just capitalism is terrible, we can't do anything until it's gone.
Yeah, which is easy to say because the system is broken, right? It's leading to accumulation of wealth for very few, and it's not making people's lives better. But what we're experiencing now is unfettered capitalism. Mm. And I think going to basic principles, like you talked about, basic principles and basic values is correct. Aristotle talked about the need for markets in a very logical way that I think most people can get behind. He talked about how the reason why we need markets is because we can't be self-sufficient. We're not truly able to provide everything we need in life because we're interdependent people. And so we need to be able to buy things or trade things from other people who can produce things that we need that we can't because we're not sole survivors. And so because of this interdependence, a market is an expression of interdependence in that we are a community and there's some standardization of value. The problem with unfettered capitalism is that the expression of value doesn't reflect value in the real world sometimes, right? There's a misalignment of understanding and measurement of value. And so when we say things like capital should include not just financial capital, but it should include human capital, social capital, cultural capital, natural capital, and intellectual capital, we are talking about measuring things that aren't measured by our financial system. And these things are a choice. It's a choice that our current system prioritizes financial capital over human capital or labor. We haven't raised the federal minimum wage since 2009. And when we think about how to create a system that goes beyond capitalism sucks, we have to talk about what is the problem that we're talking about. Because if we want to build a better world, we need to get aligned and we need to get organized around what that better world looks like. And so I am much less interested in capitalism is bad because it doesn't move us forward together. It gets us stuck, like you said, in the old ways of replicating harm. And so much about our climate movement has been revolving around stopping harm for good reason. We had to stop fossil fuel plants from being built, new leases from being extended, and now we have to kind of transition our mindset from stopping harm to building the new world as fast as we can because we are in an urgent crisis. And that's a shift in mindset and a shift in priorities and a shift towards solutions.
I want to pull at something that you said, which is the idea that a market is an expression of interdependence. So I think that's really important. And I think that in our world, or within the world of, as you say, unfettered capitalism, it's that we've lost sight of the values of interdependence, right? In the natural world, there are certain guardrails, right? Nature doesn't hoard. Most species don't hoard. There's, you could say, natural checks and balances, right? And that just highlights the need for regulation, right? It's the unfettered part that is really the problem here. So how do we shift the focus towards regulation in some of these conversations?
I feel really lucky to have grown up on an island. I was born and raised in Hawaii. And when you live on an island, you know two things. You know natural resources are limited, that you can't get everything you want unless it comes from the land. And you realize that your thriving depends on everyone around you. And there are a lot of beautiful places in the world. Hawaii is one of them, but it's most special because of the values of Native Hawaiians that suffuse everything that we do. In ancient Hawaiian times, there were tracts of land that were organized called ahupua'as. And ahupua'a was a slice of land from mountain to ocean. We call it from Mauka to Makai. And these pizza slices of land from mountain to ocean were a community, and they were a self-sufficient community, but not each individual within each ahupua'a was self-sufficient. The people who lived along the shore and fished, they often needed medicine or birds or wood from the forests and the mountains, and they would trade with the folks who lived in the mountaintops. And only together within the ahupua'a could you be self-sufficient. And so that interdependence was such an ingrained part of growing up in an island. And when you think about it, the planet is an island. You know, this is the only planet we have. That it's a really good one.
It's the best island.
It's the best island, and we should do more to protect it. And living in Hawaii, people know that not only is the land just land, the land is your ancestor. It is a family member, and you treat it differently when you think of land that way. And you also know that if you take care of the land and people, then it nourishes you in return. That which we nourish nourishes us in return. And so that interdependence was a crucial part of survival. And everything they made, canoes, houses, food, came from a combination of what everyone was stewarding. And so that's all to say that in those times there were also regulations. It wasn't just individuals were self-moderating. There was a community social contract that you couldn't take too much fish at the wrong time of the year. Or I've been spending the last 5 years learning to hunt, because as a meat eater working in climate, I wanted to get more sustainable sources of meat. And so I've learned that Native Hawaiians, if you hunted the wrong animal at the wrong time of year, you would actually be severely punished by the community. It was a social contract that we were in this together, and you shouldn't break the social contract by upholding your individual values more than the community values. And that's centrally what we don't have right now as an expression in our markets. When we talk about market failures of the prices not reflecting the actual costs, or entire customers that are not deemed valuable being excluded from the market, we're talking about market failures because we're not valuing the interdependence that we, at our core ancestral roots, know that we rely on. And that we can fix, because it's just incentive systems and structures, and that's by design, and we can redesign a better world.
And what you're saying also, I think, comes down to how do we create our economic regulations in a way that is in alignment or in harmony with ecology, right? Ahapua is an incredible example, because it makes you realize how in somewhere like, the continental U.S., we have these arbitrary lines of states that cut through watersheds, and we have rivers that flow through multiple governances, and in a way that doesn't really make sense with the ecology of a place. And it makes me think about that the root of the word economy is eco. It's something that should be tied to how the natural world wants to grow and thrive. It's how can we start to create a harmony between these two things, rather than seeing conversations about capital or the economy as, for some reason, inherently at odds with this movement or environmentalism, I suppose.
Yeah, completely. Economy and ecology have the same root, like you said.
They go hand in hand. But I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you're learning on this journey you're on with hunting, and that as a way to, I suppose, practice living in harmony with the land in a way that is truly sustainable.
One of the issues of a globalized industrial system is that we become so separate from nature and from the source of our nourishment and life. And that is very true with the way we get our food. So we can walk into a grocery store and everything's packaged, very neatly, and we don't have to ask where it comes from. And so the fact of the matter is, as a avowed meat eater, I love meat, but working in climate, knowing what the industrial meat complex is doing to the planet, I wanted to see, could I still be a meat eater if I had to gather food at its source, if I had to get my own meat? And when you're confronted by the taking of a life for one's own nourishment, I feel both at once incredibly connected to my ancestry and all of our ancestry as humans, and also so much in grief. Like, I do not enjoy the taking of the life, but I realize that that feeling I have, that sickness, that is being outsourced every day, every time I eat meat from the grocery store or in a restaurant. And so it's brought me closer to the costs of the life I live, and made me more responsible of it. When you take an animal's life, you have to honor it by eating all parts of it. And there is no hoarding. Hunters are great at sharing their food with others, and it kind of ties you closer to your community because you can nourish your community, and then there's beautiful nourishment that comes in return because of that. So even though I actually have taken to hunting as my main source of meat right now, I actually eat less meat because I've reverted more towards how our ancestors ate meat, which is to eat less of it, to realize that it should be scarce. It is special because there's so many costs associated with it. And we can actually be a locus for our community by the provision of nourishment as opposed to just thinking of it as constant extraction.
Right. You mentioned that you're on the board of the Sierra Club Foundation. How do you think about the role of philanthropy and investment, and also critically subsidies, in shifting our economic systems? And I know that subsidies in particular is something that you have some thoughts to share on, and I would love for you to just kind of illuminate how they work within this context as well.
Clean energy provides a good example of this. So often when people critique clean energy or solar or any new emerging technology like geothermal, they say, well, that's just too expensive. It's more expensive than fossil fuels, and so that can't survive in the market. That's not ready to scale. And that's not true for two reasons. One is that the fossil fuel industry enjoys trillions in subsidies every single year, and people forget about that. It's not a level playing field between new renewable technologies and old dirty technologies because they already get subsidies. So already we're talking about we're not putting our money where our values are for the future. And secondly, solar is actually way cheaper than fossil fuels now. We just turned the corner on that in the last several years. And the reason why solar is exploding across the world is because the cost of it has come down so much through technological innovation. And we will see that with every other emerging clean technology, because that's the adoption curve of all technology in the history of human innovation. For example, fossil fuels like coal, oil, natural gas, all of those took about 60 years to reach mainstream adoption. And they took a lot of subsidies to get to that lower cost to reach mainstream adoption. And we're expecting renewable energy to do what these other technologies did in 60 years at a lightning fast speed, and it's getting there. And so we sometimes forget our history and where it came from and expecting things to be mainstream. So now we're at a place in which clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. And
Yay.
It doesn't pollute the earth and doesn't cause air pollution that causes asthma, particularly in disadvantaged communities. Like it is, we don't have to use fossil fuels anymore. And so why isn't it more prevalent? Well, the old system is really entrenched. And all of our infrastructure for over 100 years was geared towards centralized power being pushed out by power plants that were run on fossil fuels. And so it takes time, and it takes a lot of changes on a transformational infrastructure level to get to the new clean energy economy we need. Luckily, that is helping our prosperity as we build the new economy. For instance, since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022 in America, there's been over 320 new manufacturing or clean energy or electric vehicle projects that have been built across the country. That's led to $120 billion in investments across the country. And if we stop those investments, then we'll lose good paying jobs that come along with that, and a resurgence of economic activity in a lot of parts of the country that have been more blighted in the past several years. And so an example of some of the initiatives that Sierra Club Foundation is doing, investing money into projects particularly in disadvantaged communities that have been excluded from the clean energy transition. An example is providing a credit facility to the first solar developer in West Virginia. So
Wow.
they're training coal miners to be solar installers. And they've since expanded to other states like Kentucky and Maryland and Virginia. This is a company called Solar Hauler. Another example is investing in indigenous-led solar projects and wind projects. So the Sierra Club Foundation made an investment in the Standing Rock tribe to build a wind farm and gave them a low-interest loan to do that because they were having trouble getting capital from traditional financiers. Same thing with this group called Navajo Power, that is a tribal-led solar developer building utility-scale solar for a project they were building in Arizona. And these are new economic models, new leadership we haven't seen before in clean energy that is building the future as we speak. But they're not getting financing from the traditional markets because they're either seen as not enough history of financial traction or too risky. And those definitions of risk are misplaced. We don't define risk well as a financial system. So we can use these capital innovations to really build the new world at a faster pace with new leaders at the forefront, with frontline communities centered, with community ownership of projects, or at least community control or community benefits. So that's enlivening, and I think people can get behind that new world as opposed to being stuck in how the old world operates.
And I think it speaks to, some of these initiatives that you're describing that the Sierra Club Foundation is shifting resources to speak to a key principle of, a just transition, which is not leaving anyone behind, whether that is, placing indigenous groups at the center, or it's training people who did work in the old infrastructure and giving them the tools and the skills to shift towards working in clean energy. And to me, it really embodies that spirit of let's build this new system together. And it's so critical right now because we just had an election here in the US where the economy was ended up being such a central factor. And we need people to understand that a green transition is ultimately good for the economy and that there's real wins here to see as well. What is the biggest barrier keeping capital locked in the old system, and how do we move past it?
The Italian revolutionary Antonio Gramsci talked about how the old way is dying and the new way has yet to be born. And in the interregnum, which means in that intervening time, a variety of morbid symptoms occur. So we're living in this time where the old is dying and the new has not yet been born.
And there are morbid symptoms.
And there are morbid symptoms abound. And so the old industry, fossil fuels, is clinging onto power, clenching power onto power, and they don't want to let it go. And it's a lot like in biology, right before an animal or people sometimes die, they experience something called terminal lucidity, which is right before they die, they have a surge of energy. And it's a common phenomenon in the natural world. And what we're seeing is that there's a dying industry and they have a surge of energy to hold on to power. So there's a lot of outspending and outlobbying that the fossil fuel industry is doing in comparison to the new technologies because they're smaller organizations or startups and they're not able to combat with the same amount of resources. But when you have a lot of money hoarding power, the only answer is community. Community is the salve for moments like this. And so you can start to build power by building community.
And I want to stick with this thread of community for a second, because I think that in a time when it feels like federal change can be difficult to achieve, it brings us back to the power of community and local change, local organizing. Can you share a little bit about, in this time of growing political pushback against climate policies and equity initiatives, how do we harness the power of community to sustain the momentum of change that we need to see? And I think you have a specific example to share about how individual relationships even sometimes can be a big motivator in creating the kind of change that we need to see.
I spent the last 10 years running a community solar company that worked to put affordable solar in the hands of everyday Americans. 50% of our customers had a household income less than $50K a year. We had projects across 6 different states, over 70 projects that were getting clean energy savings to households that couldn't put solar on their own rooftop. So community solar is the idea that you enjoy a portion of a shared solar farm instead. So community is embedded in the product and in the way that people enjoy clean energy savings. And we found when we were going to people and saying, hey, there's this amazing product, it saves you 10% on your electricity bills, you don't have to put anything on your home, you don't change your relationship with the utility company, do you want to sign up? A lot of people would be like, whoa, that sounds too good to be true. I don't trust you. No, thank you. And we were like, wow, okay, so there's this amazing product. It just saves people money on their electricity bill, and they're skeptical with good reason, because especially low-income communities have been so exploited that there's a deficit of trust. And so we found that if we went through community partners, people they trusted, like their workplace or their schools or their neighbors, and we got them to tell them about the product, that people would sign up in exponentially higher numbers. So if I came to your door and I said, hey, Willow, can you sign up for community solar? Statistics show that only 1 out of 100 people will sign up that way. But our numbers show that when a friend went to you and said, hey, Willow, sign up for this, I did it too, then 30 to 50% of people signed up for community solar with Solstice that way.
Wow.
So all the studies show this too, by the way. There's like a Yale study by Kenneth Gillingham that shows that the reason why people put solar on their rooftop is because they saw their friends and neighbors doing it. There's a study through RARE, which is a behavioral economics institute in climate, that showed that why do people take climate action, defined as composting or buying an EV or getting a heat pump or getting solar. They don't do it based on whether or not they believe in climate change. Unfortunately, a lot of people believe in climate change and don't take those actions. They found that it didn't matter whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, and that was surprising to some people, but they take climate action kind of equally in equal measure. The only predictive thing that showed that whether people take climate action is if they see everyone around them doing it too. That action is contagious and invigorating and inspiring, and if people see people they trust do something, they want to do it too. So we often talk about financial capital as the most important currency in the world, money as being the most important currency in the world, or if you work in clean energy, you often talk about electricity being the most important currency. But in fact, trust is the most important currency, especially in these times. And trust is earned, not entitled. So trust is the currency in which we should build our systems around.
Trust is the currency. And you know what I've loved about creating this series is how so many of the different episodes have fit together. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we had Esther Perel in an earlier episode speaking about the modern loneliness crisis, right? And it shows how all of these problems are really interconnected, but so are the solutions, right? Fostering trust, creating community, getting to know the people around us actually can help make climate action contagious, because you see your neighbor doing something and it inspires you to do something. And it also, to me, really highlights, there's often, I think, a conversation around, do we focus on individual action or do we focus on collective action? And it's such a false binary to me, right? Because your example is a perfect illustration of the fact that sometimes your individual action can illuminate a path forward for the person next to you, right? And it makes me think of murmurations of starlings, right? They're flying through the air, and there's not just one conductor. It's each starling is looking at it's 7 birds around them, right? And they're all flying in harmony. And so there is so much that we can do as individual actors within our communities, within our neighborhoods, within the relationships where we can actually build trust as currency, as you're saying.
Yeah, I started out as a kid thinking I was going to change the world, and I've gotten much more humble since then. And I realized since then, one of my greatest lessons in life is that actually a voice can change a room. I believe that in the core of my soul, that a voice can change a room, and that is the unit of change that matters. And so what matters is not actually I'm going to change everything, but I can change what I can control. And that creates a ripple that inspires other people to join the movement too. And that is how we actually build the new world we need.
You know, I can't believe that we're this deep into this season of the podcast, and I have not brought up my mother, because she is one of my greatest teachers. And growing up, she was a professor of ethics, and I used to watch her give talks and lectures at different universities. And something she would always talk about was that you didn't need to reach everyone. Sometimes it was just about reaching like the 5 people around you, right? That's your sphere of influence, because you don't know who each of those 5 people are connected to, because they have their own sphere of influence. And I think so often people are afraid to use their voice, or they question what they could possibly influence. But it doesn't matter how big or small that room is. Every single person is in a room with other people who need to hear how they can create change in their lives. And so I love your analogy of it's not about using your voice to change the world. It's using your voice to change the room.
It's a unit of change. And it makes a lot of sense that your mom was a deep thinker. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Mom, I hope you're listening to this.
Actually, my mom is the one that taught me about redefining wealth, because we didn't have money. She was a single mom with 3 kids. And so we grew up, it was impossible to define success or happiness based on money because we didn't have it. And so she said, wealth is what people cannot take away from you during hard times or during a recession. So what does that mean? That means like wealth is your time, wealth is your relationships, wealth is the knowledge in your body and spirit and mind. No one can take that away from you. And so starting from that elemental core belief, and then realizing that actually, yeah, capital is helpful in the world on a practical level, because it allows you to change the world and influence systems and move incentive structures to be more aligned with our human values. That, you know, it's not like we're saying that wealth on a financial level doesn't matter. It's one of many things that matter. And how do we align all those things that make us live better lives?
It's beautifully said. So speaking of scale, as a last question, what are a few actions that listeners, no matter their background, no matter their field of work, can take to help shift capital towards this more just and regenerative world that you're describing?
Given that we've established the dichotomy between individual action and collective action is a false dichotomy, can we take individual action that serves as the light to everyone around us, that's the way of the future? I want to follow that. Can you consider getting community solar if you don't own? Or can you help community solar get built in your community? Because there's $7 billion of solar for all money that is right now flowing into 49 states and 6 tribes across the country who are building more affordable solar projects. Can you help them? And then can you put it on your own home if you can afford that, or get the financing to do it? Or can you join a local campaign to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't get repealed? You know, there are so many ways to make sure that we can do it. And then lastly, just talking to your friends and neighbors about it. Like, be the starling that everyone around wants to follow. Be the light that lights up a dark room. And slowly but surely together, only together, will we get through some dark times.
Thank you so much, Steph. This has been such an illuminating conversation. Honor to have you on the podcast, and appreciate you using your voice to change the room.
Thank you for building the cultural movement for climate. It's been a pleasure to be here.
At the end of each episode, I offer 3 prompts for guided self-reflection to help internalize and investigate how this week's themes show up in our daily lives, and how we can apply the principles discussed For this week, my questions are: 1. What does what I spend my money on reveal about what I value? 2. What is a form of wealth that I want to invest more in? 3. How can I use the currency of trust that I've amassed with people in my life to better impact the planet? The Nature of is an Atmos podcast produced by Jesse Baker and Eric Newsom of Magnificent Noise. Our production staff includes Julia Nat, Eleanor Kagan, and Daniel Hartman. Our sound designer is Kristen Muller. The executive producers of The Nature of are me, Willow Defabaugh, Teresa Perez, Jake Sargent, and Eric Newsom. Atmos is a nonprofit media organization focused on the cross-pollination of climate and culture. In addition to our podcast, we deliver award-winning journalism and creative storytelling through a biannual print magazine, daily digital features, original newsletters, and more. To support our work or this podcast, see our show notes or visit atmos.earth/biome. That's atmos.earth/biome. I'm your host, Willow Defabaugh, and this is The Nature of.